economics have said that this scenario could actually arrive within the next few weeks. And so now we're going to take a look at what it says in the article. It says fears are mounting that the world is headed for an economic blow far worse than the COVID pandemic within weeks. And of course, they talk about the fact that there's going to be food shortages. And as I mentioned, grounded planes and panic buying. And analysts are saying that this isn't just about, the rising prices, but also that it can cause a full-blown supply crunch. It says that this could trigger, a domino effect as far as the global economy is concerned, hitting everything from air travel to food production. And at the center of this is really the Strait of Hormuz and how this passage is central to, people being able to receive the supplies that they need. Obviously, a fifth of the world's oil and gas passes through this waterway. And so it's a vital part of what's going on here and what's causing these issues. And so we're going to also take a look at a video clip here in which the commentator is going to discuss these points further so that we can understand just how vital this Strait of Hormuz really is. So let's take a listen to that.
Okay, here it is.
Look around and try to find anything that doesn't have fossil fuel embedded in its manufacture or delivery. It's everywhere, in everything. Toothpaste comes from petrochemicals. So does Panadol, as do most of our medicines. Most of the fertilizer that grows our food is made using gas. Without it, half the world's population would starve. There is no industrial scale replacement. This is why oil and gas underpin the price of everything. When the supply is cut, the entire global economy shakes. Closing the Strait of Hormuz is the Iranian regime's nuclear option. Within days of the truck stopping, our society would begin to fail. We're not there yet, but we are profoundly exposed.
Mercy. So we're talking about cosmetic items. We're talking about hygiene products, toothpaste. We're talking about agriculture, growing food and travel. Marie.
Right, exactly. And also pharmaceuticals. How many people are, in need of those things? And I think one of the things that is really interesting that is going to affect all of us is the fertilizer, has a direct effect on the food production.
Right.
And so he also said that if, there was a complete closure to the Strait of Hormuz, that half of the world would starve. I mean, we need to stop and think about that. And this is why, as he mentioned in the video, that it is Iran's nuclear option, because of its far-reaching implications. But we also want to keep that point in mind about what he said about how if they end up closing it completely, because that's going to come up again eventually at the end of the presentation. Not sure if you wanted to jump back in here.
So this sounds like it is the pestilence 19 2.0.
Exactly.
As if it is a repetition, but not to the same degree. It's going to be hotter and be worse, not in the same level, but higher, deeper. Because remember, we all recall that there was indeed a supply chain crisis during the pandemic. This one could be worse, Marie.
Correct. Yes. And of course, remember that the result of what's happening is based on a de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz, because, obviously there's a higher risk, with shipments going through the Strait of Hormuz because of the ongoing crisis. So we're not even really feeling the full effects yet. And so we're going to take a look at what the governments are currently doing to mitigate the effects that they're already feeling. So let's take a look at the next article here. It says war on Iran. It says, can fuel rationing, remote work, and short sleeves ease oil woes? And so let's take a look at the next article. It says the world's energy watchdog has advised governments to reduce highway speeds and encourage workers to carpool or ideally work from home to combat, obviously, these soaring costs and fuel shortages. But it also recommended countries consider limiting car access to designated zones in large cities by giving vehicles with odd numbered plates access on different weekdays to those with even numbered plates. And so, of course, that piques my interest, right? Because they're talking about restricting access to designated zones in large cities, right? Isn't that synonymous or similar to what they've always talked about, these car-free zones, the 15-minute city concepts, where in my mind, they're essentially conditioning people to accept this already, having to live within this 5-mile radius.
as you covered that a while ago, three quick things. Number one, the crisis won't hit as yet because there's always a little in reserve. But once the reserve is expended, then the issue, the crisis at the Strait of Hormuz is going to affect us, not just as a nation corporately, but as individual families and individual persons. Number one. Number two, as you read that, I also recalled what happened during the pandemic. Because notice, you read that by giving vehicles with odd numbered plates access on different weekdays, don't forget that, to those with even numbered plates. You know what? Take a look at this, Marie. This happened in the Cayman Islands, the Caribbean, and Latin America during the pandemic. If you notice, it actually said that there were hard curfew and soft curfews. Those with last names A to K can only do essential travel only on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Okay, those with last names ending L through Z can do so only on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Imagine that. Now, if my last name was between L and Z, I'm working, 2 jobs. So, and there's curfew at the end of each day. So I won't be able to buy or sell on Tuesday or Thursday. The only day that's left is Saturday, but I'm a Seventh-day Sabbath keeper. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. So on what day will I shop? So now I must think of taking off from work without pay just to go buy and sell. How long can that continue without me breaking the bank and using up my reserves? Not only in the Cayman Islands, not only in Latin America, also in Jamaica. It's right there on the screen. St. Catherine, people whose surnames begin with the letter A through M will be allowed to get their food stock or medication, Marie, between 10 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. only on Wednesdays and Saturdays. Back to my point. Only one person from each household is allowed to visit the shop or supermarket. That's startling. That is satanic. And persons with surnames ending, starting with letter N through Z will be allowed to carry out similar exercise from 1:30 p.m. to 5 p.m. only on Wednesdays and Saturdays. It's all there. The Prime Minister also said older people will be able to travel only on specific days. That is draconian. Not only in Jamaica, Cayman Islands. Look at Peru. In Peru, men can leave their houses only on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. In Panama, those days, only women can leave Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And guess what? Nobody can leave their home on Sundays. Again, Oswego. It's all the same exact thing. Now this one connects. It's talking about license plate, right? Notice it says voluntary travel restrictions has residents who were born in an odd year. You can only travel Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. That means they must have checkpoints. Show me your license, please. Let me see what year you were born in. 19, give me a date, preacher. 1980, what now? 1995, odd number. You can only travel Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You dare not travel on Tuesday and Thursday if you're born in an odd number year. It goes on. I mean, this is ridiculous. No, it's satanic. Even numbered years could travel only Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And guess what? You can't leave on Sunday. In Puerto Rico, is that not linked to America? Vehicle license plate ends in an even number. You can only travel Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. If your license plate ends with an odd number, you can only travel Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturdays. Look at this now. No vehicle will be allowed to travel on Sundays. Here's my point, Marie, and we could go on and on and on and on and on. In different, same thing in different countries. Okay? On and on. Here's my point here, Marie.
Mhm.
It seems to me that they have the draconian policies already on the books. And as soon as there is a crisis, they are quick, or may I say, revert to promoting it again. Never let a good crisis go to waste, Marie.
Right. And it's interesting, Pastor, because you always comment on the fact that we see things in waves. And I believe that you're going to, again, see the waves increase with intensity and also with frequency. And as you rightly stated, one crisis, they revert right back to the same metrics and the same things that they've used in time past, which is interesting too, because, we've talked about this before. I've always said that I have a very holistic view when I look at current events. I may not necessarily understand how it plays in the bigger picture, but I file them away, which kind of leads to the next point that we're going to discuss, right? Because recently there were a couple of legislators here in Congress who discussed the fact that they're introducing these kill switches, right? And we're wondering why in the world would they need to introduce these things? But again, when you're looking at the bigger picture and you're seeing how these governments are starting to say that because of the energy crisis and various things, we're going to have to restrict movement, right? So can you imagine if you have a kill switch in your vehicle and you've gone too far, maybe it's the wrong day, they're going to be able to shut your vehicle down. So for those who may not have heard of it, we have a video clip in which you can listen to this very point. So let's take a listen to that.
Okay, here it is. I believe this is politician, Congressman Massey.
Mhm.
Here he is.
And I regret that we have to offer this amendment. What I'm going to describe will probably sound like a bad science fiction movie, but that's what's written into law. Right now in law, that's going to be implemented it says for 2026 and beyond. Now, the reality is the technology doesn't exist, but that doesn't keep legislators from imagining things that they would like to do to infringe on civil liberties. But there's a law that states that every vehicle manufactured is going to have a kill switch in it. The car itself will monitor your driving. And if the car thinks that you're not doing a good job driving, it will disable itself.
After what Representative Massey said, the car is going to be the judge, jury, and sentencer for your crime in the car. The next thing is going to be, well, we need to hook this thing up to the government so we can dispatch the police. I'm just going to tell you what's going to happen next. They're going to be shutting your car off when they decide whatever they decide from wherever they decide it.
Marie.
Yes. And so, Pastor, obviously we can see based on these clips that they are, as we mentioned, reintroducing some of the same things that they introduced during the COVID crisis. So let's look at the following headline so that we can see essentially what they're reverting back to. This is coming from the Fortune magazine. It says the Iran war is reviving remote work across the world, from Denmark to Vietnam. And again, Pastor, we're going to continue beating this. These are the exact same policies. And, when I was contemplating this, I'm going to say something that could be misconstrued, and seem a little controversial. But Pastor, could it be that COVID to a degree was almost like a form of cestius?
Yes.
And now with this current crisis, right, with this Iranian war, we're seeing how Titus is coming back. And, remember, again, we're talking about lockdowns, restrictions, the travel bans, working from home, the inoculations, all of these things. You weren't even able to go to church, right, to be able to worship according to the dictates of your own consciences. So these are the exact same things. And like I said, imagine if, because if we're still using the same illustration, when Titus came, there was no break. We, those that were inside of the city, unfortunately, were stuck. So, may this be a warning for us as we're seeing the army approach it. Did you want to interject there?
And they have the perfect crisis to justify restricting travel, right? Notice,
Yes.
No oil, no gasoline, no diesel, right? So we must restrict, we must limit your travel. And we must now have checkpoints on major highways to make sure that the restrictive policies, the satanic policies are being adhered to. Do we realize what could be, what should be, And God is simply holding back things just a little longer for us to implement the 5 keys of survival. Marie.
Yes. And, with that, Pastor, we just have to realize too that it's coming. We have to see it for what it is and hasten our footsteps. So let's take a look at this next article here. And, they're telling us essentially in the headline there, it says that, these the hybrid work and remote work and things of that nature could end up being something that's going to stick. So unlike COVID, they brought in the restrictions and they removed them, but now they're telling us that they may implement these things and they may stick. So let's take a listen to another clip in which he's going to discuss this very point, the things that governments around the world are currently doing to mitigate.
Wait. Let's get the headline and the date. Because some folks may think this is between March 11, 2020 and May 11, 2023. No. That's Fortune magazine.
Yes, it is. Yeah. From
Right.
March the 21st, it says COVID gave us hybrid work. The Iran war might give us a 4-day work week, and this time experts say it could stick. So
Right.
yes, this is for the long term.
March 21st
Mhm.
this year, Marie. Let's
And
go.
also, Pastor, the fact that in this article, they're telling you, they're referring back to COVID. There's no ambiguity here. They're telling you what we did previously is what we're going to do again. I
Right.
just wanted to point that out. So
So
yes, we can take a listen.
So let me
to that.
re-emphasize your point that you thought would be somewhat controversial. We can look at the pandemic as a dress rehearsal, as Cestius descending upon Jerusalem, and now we're seeing a repetition is going to get worse as the coming of Titus.
Yes, correct.
Marie.
hmm We're going to take a listen to that next clip.
Okay, here it is.
It looks like COVID-style lockdowns are slowly making a comeback. This time, it's not due to a virus, though, but rather it's because of the Iran war, or more specifically, because of the situation currently unfolding over in the Strait of Hormuz. Countries are now both asking as well as mandating people to work from home. For instance, over in Denmark, you had their energy minister nearly beg citizens to stop driving, telling Danes to please not drive a car unless it's absolutely necessary. That was an example of a country giving a suggestion. However, over in Southeast Asia, the governments of several countries there have gone a lot further because, frankly, those countries depend a lot more on imported oil from the Middle East, somewhere between 60 to 95% depending on which country you're looking at. And so Thailand, for instance, they have ordered their civil servants to use the stairs instead of the elevator, to work from home instead of coming to the office, to set their air conditioners to a cool 80 degrees Fahrenheit, to cancel almost all international travel, and government employees must wear short-sleeve shirts rather than business suits. The Thai government added that if the situation continues too much further, more stringent measures will have to be implemented.
That is, if we didn't understand end-time prophecies, we would call that ridiculous, asinine. It's just humorous. But because we understand end-time prophecy, we know it is draconian and satanic. Marie.
And I'm just wondering, how are they going to monitor whether or not I'm using the elevator or the stairs or but then again, there's going to be, look at what happened during COVID. There were people who were literally, calling the police on their neighbors and things of that nature. So even the mindset, because it has to be for the common good, the greater good, everyone has to work together. So can you see why Sister White says that we have to move out into the countries so that, I forgot exactly how she says it, so interference with enemies and things of that nature, we have to separate ourselves. But what I really want to emphasize from this video clip is the fact that he talks about how some of these restrictions that the government is rolling out, they're voluntary, right? However, he also noted that some of the governments are also introducing more austere measures, right? And of course, as they deem necessary. And isn't that exactly what they did during COVID? Again, it's like COVID 2.0. But I want us to take a look at some of these measures that the governments are already taking. Mind you, that the Strait of Hormuz they haven't completely shut it down yet, but this is what they're doing. So let's look at this first.
Hold on, Marie, before you go there. I'm not sure if STS Live remember when we covered several counties in America, several countries in the world where families, residents had to change out their meters and bring in smart meters during the pandemic. And that from headquarters, they were able to manipulate the temperature in your home. They were the ones that set your temperature in your home, and you had no way, no permission, no authority, no leverage to change the setting, the temperature in your home. Tell me if that is not satanic. Where are your liberties? So from headquarters, somewhere in the city, in some town, they can fix every home temperature. And if you go above that or below that, if you can manipulate it, they fine you. Penalize you financially. Jail time. Google that. In Switzerland, even here in America, we cover that. And as they see one more crisis, they are willing to revert back to those same policies or revert to those policies and roll them out again. Never let a good crisis go to waste. That's why I believe, Marie, it's a high possibility that this war with Iran and the dragon nation in the Middle East, it has no end in sight. I could be wrong, but this could be a possibility. It is plausible. They're not going to allow this crisis to go to waste. Marie.
Correct. And also, in addition to all of the other elements, right, what's currently going on with Israel and things of that nature. So you're right, Pastor. I completely agree with you that I don't think that there's going to be an end with that. And like you said, never let a good crisis go to waste. So let's take a look at this next headline, which again is part of the reason why we mentioned this in the title. It says a public holiday every week. Sri Lankans bemoan the enforced day off. That should send, alarm bells off for Seventh-day Adventists. And Pastor, it's a precursor, for those who see it. And what resonated with me or what came to mind is, could this catapult us? Could governments use this as a pretext, right? Or an excuse, right, to legislate or enforce as they called it, an enforced day off? Why enforced? Why did they feel the need? I believe providentially God allowed, the times to use that headline again to awaken us, because we know eventually it's going to be an enforced day of rest and subsequently an enforced day of worship.
It's clear, Marie. It's clear.
Yes. And so let's continue looking at this next article.
And again, let us connect two dots here, Marie, right? We're talking about oil and energy, right? And if we can cut back on America's energy consumption, what better way to do it than have an enforced day off once a week for everybody in America? And by the way, you know what? Let's make it Sunday, right? Less consumption, right? So we can preserve the little oil that we have left. This is all planned, and very, very soon they are going to implement it with more teeth, which means more restrictions. Marie.
And it ticks so many boxes if you really think about this. You can appease the conservative, right? Because it's Sunday. You can appease the quote unquote leftist, right? Because we're helping the planet. And you see how Sunday is the solution for every issue. So let's take a look at this next article from Fortune. It says Sri Lanka has launched a 4-day work week because of the Iran war. Now the nation is giving workers Wednesdays off in a desperate bid to conserve fuel. It says the government has declared every Wednesday a holiday. I love how they just announced that it's a holiday for most public institutions in desperate bid to slash petrol use. All state institutions, along with schools and universities, will shift to a 4-day work week starting this Wednesday. And, Pastor, I'm so glad that you made a point of mentioning all of those articles beforehand, because this is going to tie in exactly with the point. Because, again, some people may not necessarily see how this enforced day off it's kind of a precursor for what the Bible tells us is going to happen. But if you look at the next articles, you're going to see how some of the measures that governments have done historically, how they're going to introduce them again. So let's take a look at this article. And this says, Pakistan Punjab government to impose lockdown on Sundays. For what reason here? To conserve energy, right? It says Pakistan provincial government has decided to impose a complete lockdown in its provincial capital, Lahore, on all kinds of business activities, business, right? Buying and selling, right? In a bid to conserve energy.
Yes.
Let's take a look at another article. This is from Australia. It says, put the brakes on and keep the car in the garage on Sunday to ease oil shock. And now this is coming from the IEA, which in case the audience isn't familiar with that. The IEA stands for the International Energy Agency. And for those that don't know it, it is an international, intergovernmental body. And so, Pastor, it would seem as if, again, the world is being preconditioned to accept, this resting on Sunday, this pausing, not buying, not selling for the ultimate crisis.
Again, the crisis in the Middle East is their boogeyman, is their justification. The sky is falling, and this is what we need to do. That is the agenda. Marie.
Right. And so as we're moving forward, we're going to see how we're being thrust into this digital infrastructure. So let's take a look at this next step.
Before you go there, Marie, as you read the first article for this segment about them giving all schools, universities, an enforced day off on Wednesday, businesses forced to close on Wednesday, 4-day work week. And what was their justification? To preserve oil and so on. Do you know, my family, STS Live, they have been talking about rolling out a 4-day work week forever. It's not just because of what's happening in the Middle East. They've been talking about this for years. Even during the pandemic, this was one of their so-called solutions, so-called remedies. So now this war in Iran, the Middle East, has begun. Now they are reverting to what they were thinking of rolling out, and now they have a justification. It's a page from the same devil's playbook. Marie.
And what's interesting also to augment that point, Pastor, is this is something that has been discussed all over in
Correct.
the West, everywhere. And so again, this is what I'm saying when I say that you have to look at the whole picture and then you realize that it's all connected. So the article says here, from 4-day weeks to AC bans, the world is scrambling to save energy. And it says governments around the world are pressuring consumers to reduce energy. And it says the changes are being rolled out as a mix, listen, of voluntary acts, soft restrictions, and incentives to cut demand. But the policies are multiplying and growing more constraining as the crisis continues. So they're clearly telling you that as things increase, as the shortage, becomes worse, they're saying that essentially they're going to, we're going to go from soft restrictions to mandatory measures. Did you want to jump in here?
No, continue, Marie.
Oh, okay.
Let's keep the stranglehold on so people can realize how close we are to the end.
Amen. Right. And so again, like I said, they're doing the exact same thing they did during the COVID crisis. And so what I want us to see is how they're using these measures, how they're going to strip us of our freedom. So let's take a look at this article here about Sri Lanka. It says Sri Lanka switches to QR code-based system to ration fuel sales. Now, Pastor, when I first looked at this, I had to ask myself, if our government were to introduce a QR code to be able to purchase gas, groceries, whatever, you name it, with strings attached, because we have to look at things from a prophetic perspective. For example, as you alluded to earlier, what if they said that we were only allowed to purchase gas on the Sabbath, and things of that nature? What would I do in this instance? And this is why, we have to stop thinking that these things are going to happen sometime far in the future. These things are at our doorstep now, and this is why it's so important for us to make sure that we're prepared.
Horse and buggy. Horse and buggy. As a matter of fact, some horses are very expensive. Horse and buggy.
Right.
Marie.
Perhaps, right? And again, like I said, this may seem like this is something far-fetched, but for those people who are living in Sri Lanka, this is a reality for them. And, back to what you were saying about COVID, I actually came across another article from Bermuda, because with the articles that you presented, Pastor, it allotted them 3 days, right? And some people may say that that's sufficient for them to be able to shop on the other days in order for them to get the things that they need. But I want you to take a look at the restrictions in Bermuda for COVID. And it says here, and this is for grocery stores and for gas stations. If you note the hours here, it says that you are only allowed to shop between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Now, if you look at point C, if your surname, your last name ends with the letters R through Z, you're only allowed to go shopping on 2 days. That means Saturday and on Wednesday. And so, God forbid if you aren't able to go on Wednesday, or what if you get paid on Friday, right? And you just, I mean, there's some people who really live from check to check, and if they don't have the ability to go on Saturday, does that mean they're going to go without gas and without food until the following Wednesday? And like I said, these are things that we really need to think about, because and last point, Pastor, then I'm going to let you in here. This is why I think it's vital for us to think, why are we going to wait until the crisis hits to then move to the country, right? So if that were the case, because that's a misconception, right? How are you going to buy seed? How are you going to buy the land to be able to cultivate it for the time of the crisis? This is why these things have to be done beforehand, because once they cut us off, and there's no way around it.
Well, I know someone whose last name ends with R, and he's looking at me right now. Well, his back is turned to me in the studio. He's over there switching. He's Jared Ryan. You dare not move to Bermuda. Marie, take it away.
Yes. So we're going to take a listen to a video clip of this QR code system that's being introduced in Sri Lanka. So let's take a listen to that.
Here it is.
The government has introduced immediate fuel rationing as global supply disruptions linked to the conflict in the Middle East push prices higher. Authorities have brought back a QR code system to limit purchases and prevent hoarding, setting weekly fuel quotas for cars, buses, and trucks. While many drivers support the system to ensure fair distribution, others say the reduced fuel allowances are hurting their livelihoods. They claim to be forced to spend hours in queues, making it harder to earn enough to cover rising costs.
There are some people who buy and stock petrol. This QR system is good to stop that happening.
Although others started a world war, it is we who are suffering. It is very difficult to make a living. I am in this queue from morning.
The QR code is a very good thing, but the amount of fuel allocated to a tuk-tuk is not enough. It is better if we get 25 liters, 5 liters a day for 5 days.
Mercy. Marie.
And I'm just trying to imagine, if you're not even able to fill up your gas tank, do you see how this system would suit the agenda so that they can manipulate us? You can't travel. You can only go so far. We limit how much you get. This is why, again, you have to have these things well in advance. And, as I'm saying this, again, this is all part of the agenda. You may say, how so? We've talked about this at length, about the United Nations 50 and 5 agenda,
Correct.
and also the World Economic Forum's agenda, in which, and I believe that we have a graph for this, in which they are going to link everything, all of your essentials, to your digital ID. So I'll just imagine them incorporating, a QR code to this system in which, dictates where you're allowed to travel, how you interact with the government, smart cities, telecommunications. All of these things are going to be interlinked. And this is just another cog on the wheel for them. And if the other thing, to further solidify this point, we're going to play a clip in which the commentator is going to tell you that the same people that have been pushing the climate agenda are also in charge of determining who can and cannot, what you should or shouldn't do. It's all linked. Let's take a listen to that clip.
Okay, here it is.
Australia is in an energy, oil and gas mess. Against the backdrop of Iran, we have 36 days of fuel left. But the PM will tell you it's all your fault that supply is running low. Anthony Albanese told us all not to panic, but a week later, Labor admitted it's not ruling out fuel rationing and has appointed a fuel czar to deal with supply. And guess who's been selected? Anthea Harris, the inaugural chair of the Climate Change Authority, a woman who spent years trying to rid the country of fossil fuels.
Mercy.
Okay. Again, Pastor, it's all linked. And, I have just one more article that I wanted to show on this point here, because this isn't directly related to what's happening in Iran, but I want you to see that even here in the West, introducing policies that will dictate when or how you're able to purchase gasoline. This is coming from Mexico News Daily. Take a look at this. It says, looking at an all digital future, Sheinbaum plans to eliminate cash at the pump and the toll booths. It says, for how long will your cash be good at the pump? According to the president, ambitious timetable, digital payments at gasoline stations will be mandatory before the current year is up. As part of her goal of digitizing the Mexican economy, President said on Wednesday that the cash payments at gas stations and highway toll booths will be eliminated starting this year. And again, Pastor, I know you've talked about the fact that it seems like the United States is behind the ball. We are not. With the stable coin, with all of the other legislation, with phasing out paper checks, with what the European Central Bank is doing with getting rid of cash. Everyone is on par. They're just waiting for the other systems to ensure that they're in place. And once the crisis fully hits everyone, it's going to be like lockstep once things get moving.
Marie, I sat here and listened and watched. I thought about this. Since they're now using the war in the Middle East to roll out more satanic, draconian policies, and one of our focuses today was on energy, right? Electricity in your vehicle. Could it be, Marie, this whole push to use alternative electricity was all a facade? Think about this. Why would they want to give residents alternatives? Why give them options? Because if you want to restrict and enslave the masses, you can't give options. People don't get that. To enslave us financially, they have to remove paper currency. Remove everything that is not digital, all of it, and make it all digital. That's how they have control. If you give options, you can't have complete control. And based on end-time prophecy, they have to have total control. Now watch this. Apply that now to energy. So all this idea about let us combat climate change and let's have alternative power. No. It's a facade. That's why America, Trump administration, is not going along with that agenda. The tyrants who have him on a puppet string understand if individual families, think about that, has alternative electricity and vehicles that don't depend on the system, how are you going to restrict travel? You can't. Because they have options. And that's why I believe they're not standing for that movement. They want to make sure everybody is on one system so they can either shut the system down or keep it alive with restriction. I call that a nail in a sure place, Marie.
Amen. Exactly. Right. And, Pastor, these things are, increasing with intensity and also with frequency. And if we're not paying attention to these things, they're going to catch us off guard, which leads me to my next point, right? Because as I stated at the onset of this presentation, the Strait of Hormuz, it's a de facto closure. But what you're going to see now is that President Trump has recently given the Iranian president, or the person who's in charge right now, an ultimatum. So let's take a look at this next article from The Guardian here. It says,
Marie.
Yes, sir.
I can't help. I can't help it.
Sure.
Did you just read something from Mexico?
I did.
That they are going to eliminate cash at the pump and the toll booth? And this is going to be rolled out this year, 2026?
Yes.
So that means toll booths, if I live in a state where there are several toll booths all over the highways, if I am not a part of the digital-only society, how am I going to travel?
Right.
So now, I once lived in New York. You can't cross bridges nor tunnels without coming to a toll booth. I lived in Florida, Turnpike, the 408 Express. You can't cross those main arteries of the roadway without crossing through toll booths. Can we see what's coming? These are going to be military checkpoints, a police state. If you're not in the system, you can't travel. Okay, Pastor, I can take side roads. Oh, is that so? Don't you think they already know that they'll put things in place for side roads too? No way out. What does a siege mean? You are totally surrounded. Highways, byways, and edges. Marie, take it away. Pardon me. Let's go.
No, certainly. Which is interesting that you also noted that, because we've touched on this before. I didn't include it in this presentation, but you can look it up, where President Trump is looking to deploy the National Guard nationwide in all 50 states in April of this year. Interesting timing, right? Of all times, right? They're implementing it there. Not just that, recently, if you're watching the news, you also know that there's a shortage in the airports, and they're also looking to deploy ICE agents into the airport. Again, interesting. No way out, no way. So it's all, again, if you can see the bigger picture, and this is why I alluded to my illustration of Titus, because once you're inside of the city, once the troops have been deployed, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? And of course, this isn't to make us fearful. It's to open up our eyes. We're supposed to be men. What does the Bible say? That we're supposed to know the time to know what we should do, instead of, waiting around. So again, I'm going to illustrate the point that this crisis is only going to increase. Let's take a look at this next article from The Guardian, and so that we can see the ultimatum that President Trump has given to the Iranian president. It says, Trump news at a glance. President gives Iran an ultimatum. Iran issues Middle East a threat. It says Donald Trump has given Iran 48 hours to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to shipping or face destruction of its energy infrastructure. Tehran, in response, said it would irreversibly destroy essential infrastructure across the Middle East, including vital water systems, if the U.S. follows through on Donald Trump's threat. We're also going to take another look at another article from the Times, and it says, Iran threatens to close the Strait of Hormuz completely if Trump attacks power plants. And so again, with all of the aforementioned points, they haven't completely closed the Strait of Hormuz, and you see already what the governments are doing. So imagine once they completely close the system down. And again, referring back to that initial video clip that we played, he talked about half of the world would starve. So do you see how we are on the precipice of a great crisis? And this is also in addition to all of the other things that are happening that's pointing to Jesus' soon return, right? We're talking about right here in the United States, we're approaching the 250th anniversary. They're talking about a uniform day of rest. We're talking about Catholics openly boasting about what the Jesuits have done and how they essentially control all three branches of the government. So do you see how on every point, I mean, the signs are indicating that, we're nearing the close of probation. But like I said, in addition to that, they're introducing this digital system. In some countries, they're already rolling out. Brothers and sisters, we're at the door.
Apply the pressure, Marie. Continue.
Right. And so this is the last point that I want to mention as far as I'm concerned with this presentation, is as these things are increasing, the great controversy talks about how morality is going to decrease, right? And we're going to see crimes and all sorts of things happening. And we're starting to see a taste of that, right? Remember that a shortage on fuel and oil and things, it's not just the oil, it's transportation, food production, fertilizers, all sorts of things, right? And in this video clip, you're going to see how people are already starting to steal gasoline and petrol from other individuals. So imagine once this closes down completely and the grocery stores are empty and people aren't able to get the things that they need, like he mentioned how petrol is tied to medication and toothpaste and other things. Imagine if they can't get the essentials, how this is going to increase. Do you see the necessity of us moving out of the city so that we don't have to deal with the turmoil? It also mentioned, Sister White also tells us how there's going to come a time, Pastor, when we're going to want to flee and we're not going to be able to. And so this is Why, if you have the means, if you have the ability, do so while you can. So let's take a listen to that video clip.
Here it is.
And the war in the Middle East is having effects here at home, with authorities bracing for an increase in fuel theft across the nation amid skyrocketing petrol prices. Lizzie, it's a sign of just how desperate the fuel crisis is getting. In Queensland, truckies fuel brazenly stolen while they're sleeping at rest spots. Queensland truckies are now being told to lock their fuel tanks. Panic is also sweeping across Victoria. Police are investigating in Kyneton fuel thefts there after a number of cars were targeted. Petrol prices are continuing to soar and there's little relief in sight.
The last thing, Pastor, I want to say on this point, I didn't put it in this presentation, but I was thinking about it. In book 5 of manuscript releases, Sister White talks about how in India and Russia and in the cities of America, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember, but she talks about how the increase in cost in food and things of that nature will eventually lead to a civil war. Could this be the catalyst, right? Because again, remember, you're talking about, cutting off oil and petrol and gasoline, things of that nature, right? People aren't able to get the things that they need. Could this be the trigger? And again, remember when you talked about Professor Jang, right, X, and how he talked about how there would be a draft, and this too could lead to a civil war. So there's so many components to look at. We definitely, are in the thralls of, these birth pangs that the Bible has said were going to come.
It's startling, everything you have shared today, Marie. I want to begin to wrap this up by pointing all of us back to Matthew 24 and those signs in verse 7, the wars, the famines, the pestilences, the earthquakes in diverse places. This is a 4-prong attack, and most forks, I believe, has 4 prongs. And the next time you have a meal with a fork, remember these 4 tools in the devil's toolbox. And we just saw the devil use the prong of pestilence to roll out draconian satanic policies. And that lasted for 3.5 years. March 11, 311, 2020 to May 11, 2023, 511, 911. Think about that. And now things have abated somewhat. And here comes another prong from Matthew 24, verse 7, wars. It's clear from the scriptures. And as a result of the wars in the Middle East, those same policies have now come back to the forefront. Nothing hasn't changed. They are reverting to those same policies. And notice, there's one thing they all have in common, that's famine. No buy, no sell. Pestilence, the pandemic, famine. Everything we mentioned in this lesson. Now the wars, famine. That is, as it were, the glue. The glue. Why? Because the love of money is the root of all evil. And if I can bring people to the point of starvation, like Esau, they'll sell their birthright. Like Esau, they'll bow, give up their faith, rights, and liberties just to be able to eat, to survive. As it was in the time of Pharaoh in Genesis 47, that glue, that bonding slime is a famine. You can't buy, you cannot sell. That's why I don't believe the war is going to be abated anytime soon. They are going to juice this as if they were juicing a ripe orange or grapefruit or squeezing some lemons or limes, because they will never allow this good crisis to go to waste. With that in mind now, think about practical preparation. Because based on verse 8 of Matthew 24, it says, all these are the beginning of sorrows. Then verse 9 says, then shall they deliver you up. So we are going to be the next target, God's people. We will be the last target. We shall be afflicted, threatened with death. We can't buy or sell. We will lose our rights, lose our liberties, even our properties down the road. So what then is the work of preparation? Marie, I want to revert to a point you mentioned earlier, where they said the war in the Middle East is affecting toothpaste, affecting medication. Let's stop right there. How many Americans are sick? How many Americans depend on these medications from Pharmacia, the pharmacists? How many? Just imagine if that were a crisis, a supply chain crisis on medication. You talk about depopulation. Come back here. So what has God told us? So now, he told us, put her back in the screen, preacher, right? He told us, Marie, in Last Day Events, page 80, that soon, I wish to tell you, that's how it begins, soon, none know how soon. Listen, no work will be done in ministerial lines, only medical missionary work. It's also in Maranatha, page 185. It's in volume 7, page 62. We have come to a time every Seventh-day Adventist must take hold of medical missionary work. Volume 9, page 169. It is God's purpose that his methods of healing without drugs should be carried throughout the large cities through our institutions. Volume 9, page 169. As religious aggression subverts the liberties of our nation, those who stand for freedom of conscience will be placed in unfavorable position for their own sake while they have opportunity. They should become intelligent in regard to disease, its causes, prevention, and cure. And those who do this will have a field of labor anywhere. There'll be sick people, plenty of them who will need help. Not only of our own faith, but largely those who know not the truth. That is a practical work of preparation. Marie, do you remember the video, the movie Leave the World Behind?
I do.
When everything was shut down?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember in the video, I believe at least one youngster became ill?
Mm-hmm.
Where was he going to go?
I don't know. I saw the previews and I saw that there was one man who was prepared who had medication. Mm-hmm.
As if God is telling us. And that's how I'm going to end this now. When we go back now to the 5 keys of survival, the first key is conversion. The second key is country living. And the third key now is having food, water, and resources. Now, let's unpack the resources. Are we not in a food crisis? So what if things were shut down right now? How would we eat? Woe unto those who give suck in those days. You see? You see now? Luke 21, verse 20 through verse 23. The woe is not simply for parents with children. No. It's for parents who refuse to make the necessary preparations. There are going to be families with young children, infants, toddlers in the time of trouble. But because the parents are faithful, God will preserve. Amen. Didn't Jacob say when he was about to meet Esau that he had the mothers with young ones, so he can't move too fast? So my men go before while we trot slowly. Yes, so we can make sure the young ones aren't tired. So they're going to be young ones. But once the families, the parents are implementing the first key, the second key, God would take care of your children. But what if you refuse? Woe unto those who are with child and those who give suck in those days. Now, not only food, but what about electricity? That's why I am a big proponent of having alternative power. Yes. If not, how are you going to survive? when the county, the city shut down your electricity? What are you going to do? When we were born and raised in the 1920s, we aren't inclined to live like the Amish people in that regard. We're so accustomed to these commodities, conveniences. How are we going to survive then? How? And that's why we need to depend on nature. And by depending on nature, you're depending on God. And I know some negative people, oh, Pastor, I can't. You see, the I can't attitude will make you defeated. No blessings. I can't. Because God is going to put the solitary in families. Do your part. God will provide. He will. So stop murmuring and complaining. Come back here. So, yeah, we have to have these things for a time. Because at a particular time, in the near future, we have to leave these things also. But at least we can endure the crisis. We won't have to bow because we have made the preparation. Also for water. You can live without food a few days. You can live much longer without electricity, but not without water. Water, you have to have an independent source of water. And that's why we must get the filter system. Stock up, store up, because one day the monies in the bank will be useless to you as you stand for God. Marie, any input there?
You know, Pastor, everything that you're saying is so pointed. And I love the practical steps that you're saying that we can take, you know, and for the encouragement for those who don't have the ability to run out, you know, the Lord will provide. I do want to revert back to what you were saying about the famine. And of course, Pastor, because we're talking about an oil crisis, right? Wasn't there a famine in the land with the virgins, you know, and how it not only was a literal famine, right, but a spiritual famine. And so it just goes to show how you're showing the practical steps, right? But the spiritual steps are just as important as you mentioned, that we have to have that oil, that literal oil. And again, like I said, it alludes to the practical steps as well, because we also have to store up. I just wanted to mention that as well.
Marie, let's go out not with a whimper, but with a bang, shall we?
Sure.
Okay. We know that Sunday Blue laws, I'm going to make a distinction between Sunday Blue laws and the mark of the beast. One more time, based on these current events you shared with us today. The Sunday Blue laws in America only restricted buying and selling and to some extent travel only on Sunday. But do we all realize, based on what was covered today, during the pandemic, people could not buy or sell not only on Sunday, but some could not buy on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Others could not buy on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Are we together now? So we are seeing a precursor of what the mark of the beast is going to be. No buy on sale for God's people on any day. That's a nail in a sure place. And that's what the pandemic was Cestius, a dress rehearsal. Do we see it? And this time, it's not going to only affect local, city, and state, but federal. Marie, that's it.
It is, Pastor. Nail in a sure place.
So friends, let us understand that what was covered wasn't only in the pandemic, but what they're now proposing. Wednesdays off. What's your last name? It begins with what letter? You can only buy and sell on these days, but not on other days. Merciful Father. And only the household head can travel and purchase things. How will they monitor that? How will they monitor compliance from non-compliance? We are in a crisis. And God is holding back the winds of strife so we can be prepared. STS Live and the rest of you, let us be about our Father's business. And that's why it's time for aggressive, effective evangelism. The fourth key of the 5 keys. And number 5, assisting those who are less fortunate. Marie, thank you again for joining us for Midday Power Surge.
Amen. Thank you for having me.